Welcome back to Beyond the Framework. This is episode 4, and I'm your host, Omar Sikander with SecurityGate. Today, I'd like to talk about passwords as related to Special Publication 853 and 882 from NIST. And in episode 1, we talked a little bit about NIST Cybersecurity Framework, which from my perspective is a very broad and very light set of controls that can be seen or categorized as the bare minimum that an organization should consider as they try to maximize their security posture. To add breadth, depth, and really add some prescription to what's described in the cybersecurity framework, the 853 and 882 series of publications I feel like are really good as they do that effectively. And 853 is really tailored towards traditional IT or enterprise environments, and not all of what is published in 853 is applicable to OT environments. And if it is applicable, maybe there's some special guidance that's required when considering an OT system. So table 853 for a moment and talk about 882 specifically. It being an overlay, it contains that special guidance. It contains a subset of the controls that are presented in 853. And the latest revision is revision 3. It was released, I believe, September of 2023. And it has, plenty of sections in it. I think there's a lot of education that can be gained beyond the controls. Sections 2 through 5 talk about, what is an OT system? What are the common industries that have OT systems in place? Why is protecting OT systems important to national security? So a lot of learning that can be realized from getting familiar with that publication. So if you're new to OT cybersecurity or you need a refresher, great effective place to get a primer on OT cybersecurity. So the topic at hand, passwords. So what does 882 have to say about passwords? Well, it's got some guidance, right? Some of it's generic, some of it's specific, and I'll try to put in some of what I've seen in my career, especially recently, and layer that in the good, bad, and the ugly from Omar's point of view. So to start, 882 suggests that you should have a password for all applications that is appropriate in length, appropriate in strength and complexity, that's based off of the type of software and the underlying operating system that's being considered, right? So if you've got, design software or usability software, you might treat those differently with the length and complexity of the password. Additionally, the publication suggests that you shouldn't really have passwords that can be found in a dictionary or that could be predicted easily. So just those 2 bullet points, right, can be considered in a very simple policy. I've seen a policy from a large manufacturer that really just contains 4 main elements, right? Password must contain at least 8 alphanumeric characters, cannot be similar to the username, and must contain characters from at least a couple of different classes. And those classes are uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers, and non-alphanumeric or special characters. Pretty basic cybersecurity policy, right? Nothing out of the ordinary. Something that you can probably take on and implement that wouldn't be too revolutionary to take on and would still be able to be easily followed or implemented. The last thing in that policy is please make sure that you suggest OT users never write down their passwords. I've seen so many sticky notes that are left next to engineering workstations or operator workstations, which just defeats the whole purpose of authentication, right? If everyone can just get up to the device they're trying to access or the application and get into it really quick. So back to SP 882. There's a point in the publication that suggests using passwords on consoles could introduce potential safety issues if operators are locked out or access is delayed during critical events. So from my perspective, this means that you should consider maybe you don't need a password to hit an emergency stop button, whether that e-stop button is physical or it's digital, right? Somebody should have access to go and stop something that could be harming someone. So what happens if you've got a colleague in a dire situation and you have to stop a machine immediately to prevent a recordable incident? If you follow 853, maybe you would have MFA implemented, right? MFA in that situation probably doesn't make sense. You can't tell your colleague, hey, hold on, let me grab my multi-factor authentication app out before I hit that stop button. That's harming you, right? So this is just some of the guidance that 882 considers for OT systems versus traditional IT. Moving on, let's get into some specifics or additional specifics. 882 says systems are often coming with default passwords that are easily guessed or discovered or researched. And this is also a common sense thing that you should change all default passwords in OT components. I think organizations that are manufacturing these components are getting much better at instituting modern password functionality, such as enabling password reset, enabling devices to force you to implement some sort of custom password before it's fully commissioned. But I remember, in my previous company, Rockwell Automation, we used to commission switches where the username is admin and the password is switch, right? That's the default password. You can find that in the user manual. And sometimes system integrators, commissioned a lot of OT systems and never took the time to change these to something specific for the client. So just a point to know there. Also, publication says many OT systems lack password recovery mechanisms, and secure password handling is critical for continuous operations. So one example I've seen is legacy PLC 5s, again from Alan Bradley. I remember that if you lost the password to a program that somebody that's been there for years but just retired, if you lost access to that, there was no way to reset the password and be able to modify the program. You really have to either copy and paste it, or copy and replicate it and start from scratch if you couldn't even get into it to access the program itself. So that's a consideration, that some legacy devices don't even have password recovery mechanism. Additionally, those legacy systems might not be able to take on modern password constraints, right? So if you have a legacy system, you might be limited to 4 or 6 characters. You might not be able to use non-alphanumeric characters as well. So that's something that you should consider. Additionally, the publication suggests that when you bring in third parties, people to help you, like system integrators and others, they could visually, capture the password if it's simple enough, or remember it. It even suggests that there's maybe keyloggers that could be implemented in the system to grab passwords even after they're changed. So yes, this is a vulnerability, but to me, if you practice defense in depth and add additional remote management, remote monitoring capabilities to an overall system, you can kind of avoid having to consider this from happening, but still something to note. Additionally, some devices transmit their passwords as plain text over a network. So practicing encryption, if it's available, where the device transforms or transcribes the password into an encrypted format before it transmits it on a network, is important if that's available. I know that when I took my 62443 fundamentals class, there was a specific portion of the training where the instructor used Wireshark to perform a scan on a packet that was communicating over an OT network. And you could see how he was able to pull up usernames and passwords based off of what was transmitted on that packet capture. So that's very real, something that can definitely be used to exploit from a vulnerability perspective. Passwords can be shared among users and not changed frequently, which potentially hinders positive identification of individual users, right? So this is common in the case that you have a 24/7 manufacturing operation, maybe with 3 shifts, and you have role-based access control implemented, maybe, where you have an engineering role, you have a maintenance role, maybe you have a user role, but the password for each account is shared between the shifts. So I've seen that implemented, and yes, there's a vulnerability there, because how do you know who implemented a change, right? Maybe the change was well intended, but shift 1 coming in the morning doesn't know what shift 3 did, and if it changes the process, you don't know who to call to be able to understand the changes that were made, right? So that's just some perspective as to why, even though it's a cybersecurity topic, it could also be a hindrance to operations and making sure that you have defined roles and not necessarily have one account to manage for multiple shifts. I'm getting kind of long-winded here. There's definitely a lot more that 882 has to say around passwords. But in general, my takeaway is implement something simple to start. I know that you won't be able to implement the whole thing over all devices, but maybe if you adapt and practice, common basic password requirements, you'll be able to improve the posture that you have versus what others might consider to be unsafe. So thanks for the time, and I'll catch you on the next one.